And now I have the pleasure, and also the honor, of introducing our fourth keynote speaker to you. Professor Kerry Mallan. She is Professor of Education at the Children and Youth Centre of the Faculty of Education at Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia. And most of you are bound to know her because she was the convener of the last biennial RSCI conference in 2011, and we all have very good memories of that one. Given the theme and the mission of this conference, it is almost inevitable that we should have invited Kerry Mallan to deliver a keynote here, as her work has the same interdisciplinary scope that we aspire towards here. Kerry Mallan moves with great ease within and between the areas of children's literature, children's media, and youth culture. She is a theoretically informed textual critic, but there's also something of a sociologist in her who knows how to do empirical research on, for instance, children's online communities. There are several interesting publications on that topic. Kerry Mallan makes significant contributions to the field of children's literature research, not only through her own publications, but also as an editor of the online journal Papers, Explorations into Children's Literature, and as an editor of a book series at Palgrave Macmillan called Critical Approaches to Children's Literature. And she performs these editorial tasks together with her loyal partner in crime, Claire Bradford, or short and also known as Claire. She edits what I just said, and there's no time to list all of Kerry Mallan's publications here, but let me just mention the most recent one, which is about to come out in October this year in the series I just mentioned, and this book is called Secrets, Lies, and Children's Literature, to be obtained at a 50% discount at this conference if you order it now. And I think this book is very much the basis of the keynote she's going to present today. And the current title of this lecture is Every Move You Make, Children's Fiction and Surveillance in an Age of Security. Kerry, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Lise, for the kind introduction, and thank you and your committee for inviting me to give this keynote. It is an honour. And so you now know what happens to past conference conveners. They become the next keynote speaker. George Orwell's Big Brother of 1984 is the most frequently invoked forerunner to contemporary fictions of surveillance. Despite the frequent adulteration of his themes and metaphors, at least in the Western world, especially through the adoption of Big Brother and the popular reality TV series of the same name, Orwell's text anticipates several aspects of the age of security or insecurity we are currently living through. An age when surveillance is a permanent feature of life and expanding hyper-securitization has an increasing global reach. At airports, 20th century passport controls operate alongside 21st century body scanners and biometric checks that have proliferated since 9/11. While these practices and devices are about security and anti-terrorist measures, surveillance of every move we make is built into the tools we use every day, from accessing websites, participating in social media, downloading smartphone apps, to scanning goods at supermarket checkouts. We show ID, type in passwords, and use coded controls in numerous contexts, from online purchases to entering buildings. Corporations and governments amass enormous amounts of personal information concerning all aspects of our lives, share it with others without our knowledge, and use it in ways we cannot imagine. For example, the US National Security Agency intercepts and stores 1.7 billion emails, phone calls, and other communications every day. Information including financial transactions, health records, and Facebook status updates. Oh, there's the title. The new thinking is that people are the sum of their relationships, online interactions, and connections with content. The use of these big data is a mode of surveillance that seeks to control and regulate individuals. Several countries use predictive profiling, whereby big data analysis is undertaken to select what streets, groups, and individuals to subject extra scrutiny, simply because an algorithm pointed to them as likely to commit crime. In another context, school surveillance is increasing, and along with the heightened reliance on discipline, suspension and expulsion in the name of zero tolerance, forces out large and disproportionate numbers of youth, especially already marginalised youth, and conveys the message that these young people are untrustworthy, suspicious and potential criminals. However, the ubiquitous presence of CCTV as a surveillance device has become so much an accepted part of our daily lives that the Big Brother factor is diminished, as this cartoon represents. Nevertheless, other forms of monitoring take on a more pervasive role. For example, monitoring in the workplace, including universities, has increased since 9/11, with checks on employees' emails and internet activities, and in some instances, they have telephone calls and voicemail use. Even GPS, the global positioning system technology, is being used in some companies to track employee movements. Big Brother is always watching, but this is no longer a solid and fixed panoptic presence. In the words of David Lyon, surveillance is now more flexible and mobile, seeping and spreading into many life areas. The phenomenon of surveillance, security and big data is complex, and we need to acquire some sense of its ubiquity to understand just how life, chances and opportunities are affected in order to galvanise efforts to rein it in and to consider its ethical implications. This is not just the task for adults, but also for young people. As children's writer and blogger Cory Doctorow argues, the best way to protect young people from online predators and data miners lies in network education and making libraries islands of anonymity and encryption, in which we can learn how to jailbreak every electronic device. As we will see, his novel Little Brother goes some way in helping its readers to do just this. In this presentation, I consider how young adult fiction is responding to the so-called age of security through allegory and by offering a resistance to a moral absolutism, which is often reflected in public discourse. I propose that in a post-9/11 surveillance culture, the literature for young people testifies to a new set of anxieties about how to relate the present to the past and to the near future. It also contributes to the realm of ethics and the challenge of terror. I confine this proposition to three examples published between 2008 and 2012, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, Little Brother by Cory Doctorow, and District 5 by Kristen Simmons. Each recalls 9/11 in elusive terms. However, more significantly, each engages with an ethical imperative that is concerned with a practical or ambivalent morality in a fight for survival against corrupt and oppressive forces of the state. The texts invite readers to witness a moral calamity, and the hailing performed by the text encourages readers to support the ethical agenda of its narratives. Many readers of these texts have never lived in a world that did not contain the internet, Facebook, mobile devices, text messaging and blogs. Yet despite many young people's digital credentials, they are often universally regarded as victims of internet predators, lacking the resources to deal with or resist cyber-surveillance. From a more positive perspective, young people are the generation that David Foley sees as being part of a resurgence of political enthusiasm that has been lying dormant for the past 25 years. A contributing factor in generating political enthusiasm is the use of mobile technologies and social media such as Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. The Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street movements demonstrated the organisational role of internet technologies, and Gudrun mentioned this yesterday in her keynote. Foley's optimism for a generation of young people who will take social action is shared in the focus texts, where young protagonists are resistant, brave and adept at using their own resources and knowledge in their quest for freedom and survival. While we could argue that hero fiction, or more broadly utopian fiction, has always been about youthful resourcefulness and a moral battle between good and evil, I suggest that these texts and others are reflective of a crisis in agency of which Zygmunt Bauman speaks. This crisis, occurs when there has been an erosion of trust in that the system of government is not working and other ways for being proactive and political need to be found. The writer and philosopher Sam Harris cautions that in times of crisis, one difficulty we face in determining the moral valence of an event is that it often seems impossible to determine whose well-being should most concern us. Who benefits and who suffers from a course of action? Sorry, just a sleight of hand there. Course of action is a crucial point of consideration in the focus text. In making a decision or taking a course of action, the subject may consider that he or she is acting from a moral position. When the subject is the government, the consequences of that decision or action affect the welfare of a large population. In terms of the welfare or well-being of a population, what are the moral responsibilities of the government in times of war or when the resources are scarce? We can also ask what are the responsibilities of the individual in the face of large-scale human suffering? And these questions are at the core of the texts. In the young adult fiction to be discussed, the struggles that the young characters undergo with powerful others are intricately tied to macro, social, political, economic factors and are not simply a struggle between the individual and the powerful other, although an us versus them struggle drives the plots. From the protagonist's viewpoint, the other in the focus text is metonymically expressed as the capital in the Hunger Games, Department of Homeland Security in Little Brother, and the Federal Bureau of Reformation in Article 5. The converse is also true. The protagonists are viewed by the state or its enforcers as other because of their difference and actions that are contrary to the collective ethics and ideologies of the state. Despite the complexity of otherness as a narrative strategy, the other, whether as a threatening government, military force, or person in possession of devastating power, mirrors familiar figures in the reader's worlds. The investment in otherness is troubling when we extrapolate to the extra-textual world, a world fraught with transcultural tensions. Foucault's ideas of power and relations and ethics provide useful means for interpreting the relationship between the protagonists and how they draw on strategies for compliance and agency in their bid to survive and deal with the crisis that affects their world. Foucault considers subjects not in metaphysical terms, but as embodied beings who are capable of acting upon the world, having ability to influence and transform other forces. Foucault's view of power at the extremities is different from the notion of legitimated or sanctioned forms of power and authority held by the state as a central locus. However, Foucault too has limits, especially in a world that has now become more electronic, that has now more electronic connections than it did 30 years ago when he was alive. David Lyon makes the point that surveillance practices based on information processing, whereby the details of our daily lives become more transparent to the organisations surveilling us, but their own activities become less easy to discern. Zygmunt Bauman shares with Foucault a concern for the lived encounter with the other and a concern for ethics. These theoretical perspectives emerge throughout my paper. As the title implies, The Hunger Games plays with two key ideas, survival and entertainment. The idea of a group of young people pitted against one another in a fight to survive is one that William Golding delivered in The Lord of the Flies in 1954, an enduring tale of British schoolboys left to their own devices on a deserted island after their evacuation plane crashes during World War II. Golding's story offers a bleak view of the possibility of humanist governance by children, as the two competing groups kill and plot in their quest for supremacy. Suzanne Collins's The Hunger Games updates Golding's wartime boys' survival story by having a female hero, Katniss, and making the spectacle of killing mandatory televised viewing for the people who comprise the 12 districts of Panem, the country that rose up from the ashes of a place that was once called North America. Whereas Golding's boys were left to play out their future without an adult presence, the adolescents who participate in Collins's games are subject to close surveillance, interference, and occasional support from various adults, the game makers, groomers, sponsors, and coaches. The country of Panem exists as a closed world, with no apparent outside communications, despite the state-of-art technology in the capital, the governing city. The technologically sophisticated capital, with its video surveillance, smart technologies and tracking devices, is a marked contrast to the more agrarian-style struggle that many districts endure. The Hunger Games also extends Orwell's account of constant visual scrutiny by fusing it with the contemporary adulation of celebrity. Young people become eligible for reaping when they turn 12. As the name suggests, reaping is a time of harvesting the young to participate in the games where they must kill one another until there is only one victor. The agricultural metaphor serves both as an enticement and a reminder to history. The enticement is that the winner earns bountiful food for the people of their district, as well as personal wealth. And the reminder is that the dark days of the uprising of the districts against the capital must never be repeated. The reaping is punishment for this uprising. And the 24 tributes are drawn from the lottery pool, and when her sister's name is called, Katniss volunteers to be her replacement. The other tribute from her district is Peter Mallan. The celebration of the tributes and the pre-games processes preparing them for combat, meticulous personal grooming so that they attract sponsorship, and parading them in a lavish spectacle. And finally, conducting interviews with the charismatic host Caesar, whose job is to draw out the best entertainment value from each tribute, are part of the game's ludic framework. The pre-games preparation are a form of acculturation whereby the tributes undergo training and regulation in order to tame any resistance and to receive instructions as to how they must perform. The tributes are like elite sports players or celebrities who are marketable assets exploited as commodities. The games are held in an outdoor arena that is under constant video surveillance, and players are at the mercy of the game makers, who can change conditions in order to ramp up the excitement value for the pleasure of the viewing audience. They can create and clone dangerous animals, which within seconds can turn into real animals that devour contestants. They can start a fire that ravages the forest, and they can change the direction in which the contestants are moving when they get too close to the edge of the defined space. The visual panopticon that enables surveillance of the contestants in a confined space is similar to Jeremy Bentham's panopticon that Foucault drew on to theorise surveillance in disciplinary societies. However, the film of the Hunger Games shows how the solid architecture of the panopticon is replaced by the fluidity of electronic technologies that monitor and regulate the contestants' movements and opportunities. The Hunger Games bears comparison with the circus games of the Roman Republic, which often lasted for weeks and were purely for entertainment, taking place in large amphitheatres. The bread and circuses of imperial Rome no doubt inspired Walter Benjamin to combine two antithetical notions, aesthetics and politics, which he used in reference to 20th century fascism, with the Third Reich's reliance on ritual, spectacle and symbol. The film version of the Hunger Games recalls this Third Reich imagery in its staging of the games. The insignia, the bird insignia, the red banners that decorate the Capitol building and its mass reception of the leader. In many respects, the Hunger Games performs its own version of bread and circuses, drawing readers into its lurid spectacle. Its rivalry between districts and individuals and televising of intimate moments of human emotion carry familiar resonances in our world of reality TV. These alternating highs and lows are judged by the viewing audience in the text, who vote on whether they will send silver parachutes of food, weapons or medicine to assist the district's contestants. The text therefore performs for readers, offering a circus analogy that resembles contemporary Western society's appetite for voyeuristic entertainment that may be degrading and embarrassing for the participants, but offers a perverse pleasure for viewers. The Capitol's domination and insistence on certain forms of compliance as absolute and universal seek to overcome or dissuade resistance and otherness, and thereby preclude the possibility of different ways of being and acting in Panem. However, despite or because of its totalitarian state control, resistance is inevitable, and deception is the covert means to achieve survival. Prior to the Games, Katniss learnt how to hunt without detection in the Forbidden Forests, carefully hiding her weapons the way her father had taught her and buying and selling on the black market. She describes herself this way: "So I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts, do my work quietly in school, make only polite talk in the public market, discuss little more than trades in the hob, which is the black market, where I make most of my money." During the Games, her hunting skills become the means for her survival. However, she learns that her mask of indifference needs to be lifted if she is to win over sponsors and benefit from the much-needed survival aids they could send. While the Capitol aims to produce a certain kind of citizen, one who is submissive and compliant, Katniss is able to give the appearance of compliance by practicing techniques of self-regulation and transformation as a necessary survival technique. Her self-focused survival eventually gives way to an ethics of care for Peter when he becomes badly injured, and another tribute, Rue, who becomes a short-lived friend during the Games. Throughout the Games, Katniss maintains a moral position despite having to kill other tributes in order to survive. She also adopts her ascribed Games persona of a star-crossed lover to win viewer support, and in this way she's able to locate herself as an individual amongst the mass of tributes and adjusts her behaviour in accordance with successful performance. The main concern when the information technology revolution first began in, say, the 1960s, was that significant amounts of personal information would be stored on large, centralised computers by governments and big organisations. Fiction for young adults emerging from the 1960s onwards has been concerned with this issue of vulnerability and the loss of privacy or personal freedom. Many recent texts, such as Little Brother by Cory Doctorow, are in step with the change in technological developments and an increasingly regulated environment. We now live in a time of decentralisation of data processing, where the shift is from the computer to the user. User control is a key feature of Little Brother, which demonstrates an inherent paradox. While savvy users gain control over communication information systems, many remain clueless as to their loss of privacy, in that their personal information can be readily known and used by unknown sources. The internet, mobile phones and smart cards all generate personal data and make it possible to track and profile all activities, movements and habits of data subjects. Little Brother forges the links between secrecy, security and government and raises the broader implications of information control, surveillance and privacy. Paradoxically, it recuperates surveillance from a diffusion or democratisation of surveillance systems in an attempt to redistribute power from a central control to subversive counterforces. This power at the extremities illustrates Foucault's conceptualisation of power as a productive force. The story begins when high school senior Marcus Yellow decides to cut school to go downtown to play the alternate reality game Harajuku Fun Madness. Marcus's handle is Winston, an obvious homage to Winston Smith, the character of Orwell's novel 1984. He changes it to, now I say Mikey, you might say something else, but when he organises a covert internet resistance force against the Department of Homeland Security. To leave school undetected, Marcus has to negotiate the school's surveillance system. The gait recognition cameras have replaced the face recognition cameras, which were ruled unconstitutional. As Marcus explains, gait recognition software takes pictures of your motion, tries to isolate you in the pics as a silhouette, and tries to match the silhouette to a database to see if it knows who you are. It's a biometric identifier like fingerprints or retina scans. This instance of information sharing is the kind of education that Dr. Rose sees as important for enabling young people to be more in control and aware of the forces that impact their lives. To change his gait and avoid detection, Marcus puts stones in his shoes. He also has to evade physical surveillance. And a further obstacle is the library book his friend Darryl carries. All library books have an ARFID, a radio frequency ID tag, glued into its binding. And the ARFID enables library services, checking out of books and reshelving, to be carried out quickly, but they also enable the books and borrowers to be tracked at all times. But Marcus knows how to deactivate this device, and he carries a little Faraday pouch in his bag. These little wallets lined with mesh of copper wires that effectively block radio energy, silencing ARFIDs. It isn't able to neutralise the ARFID in the book. However, the microwave in the teacher's lounge performs this function. And as the text says, the ARFID died in a shower of sparks. The day takes an unexpected turn when terrorists blow up the Bay Bridge, causing major death and destruction and turning San Francisco into chaos, an event that resonates with the attack of the World Trade Center and the subsequent chaos in New York City that resulted. Little Brother reflects the new ambient intelligence environment that recent advances in microelectronics and wireless communications are making possible. As one researcher explains, and I'll let you read it for yourself there. These new technologies mean that ways of thinking about privacy, secrecy and publicity are changing. And in Little Brother, the characters are living with the consequences of these changes. With respect to the social relations aspect of secrecy and information, George Simmel contends that all relationships of people to each other rest as a matter of course upon the precondition that they know something about each other. Little Brother provides a chilling account of how society has moved to a point where knowing each other has become both beneficial and dangerous. Knowing about each other remains an essential element for developing trust between friends and family. In considering the dangerous side of knowing about each other, we can ask, who knows? What do they know? And what are the consequences of this knowledge? In taking its cue from George Orwell's 1984, Little Brother illustrates how surveillance technologies can affect individuals' privacy and freedom. It also shows how human beings can succumb to external forces and become passive victims, or alternatively, in Foucauldian terms, how they can become active bodies who are resistant and struggle against the limits and oppressions imposed on them, and believe in the possibility of reversal. This capacity to resist, fight back and overcome is a driving motivation behind Marcus's actions. One side of the argument for increasing technological developments is the benefits for economic growth, security and individual and social safety. The diegetic and extra-diegetic narrators of Little Brother argue the other side, giving voice to growing concerns such as profiling, surveillance, tracking, identity theft and so on, and urging readers to take action. Integral to this taking action is knowing how to circumvent, deactivate and protect user identity. The information supplied by the first narrator, Marcus or Mikey, depending which handle he's using, on hacking, using illegal web servers, spamming. Oh, sorry, something happened here. We're just a little bit ahead of ourselves because we're into the future already. So just stay with me and we'll catch up. Or hacking using illegal web servers, spamming, cryptography and ARPANET cloning is rationalised in terms of an individual's right to privacy, their right to know and other constitutional rights such as the American Bill of Rights, life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, the right of people to throw off their oppressors. The repeated invocation of the Bill of Rights throughout the text can be read as a totalising conception of ideal human existence, and the account of technological sabotage by both the state and Marcus is intended to awaken readers from any self-deceptive dreams of self-mastery or an ideal existence in a democratic society, an intention which is made explicit in the afterword of the text. What Little Brother attempts is to break down the ties between surveillance and a central authority, and in so doing redraw the moral demarcations that organise a post-panoptical society. The ethical purchase of this text resides in its emplotment of the connectivity facilitated by surveillance and counter-surveillance circuits. In response to the terrorist attack, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, becomes a force to combat terrorism and protect the people of San Francisco. However, in waging its own war on terror with increased homeland security, the DHS takes on the tactics of the terrorists in the protection and security of the citizens. After the attack on the Bay Bridge, Marcus and his friends, along with other people who were on the streets at that time, are taken by force by the DHS to a prison in the Bay called Treasure Island, where they are interrogated as suspected terrorists. In detaining ordinary citizens and subjecting them to torture, the DHS performs acts of extraordinary rendition. Extraordinary rendition is the apprehension and extrajudicial transfer of a person from one country to another. It was used under President George W. Bush's administration and continues under President Obama's administration, though new rules claim to prevent torture of abducted individuals. Marcus's prior history as an internet-savvy user with an anti-authoritarian attitude is used as grounds for suspicion, which you'll see in this, we will see it soon. In this interchange here, Marcus says, so you think I'm a terrorist? I'm 17 years old. And the DH officer says, just the right age. Al-Qaeda loves recruiting impressionistic, idealistic kids. We Googled you, you know. You've posted a lot of very ugly stuff on the public internet. A word of warning, everyone. Later, when Marcus is released from detention, the DHS officer issues a warning. We'll be watching you everywhere you go and everything you do. You've acted like you've got something to hide, and we don't like that. These are not idle threats, as the DHS has sophisticated and pervasive tracking systems to watch all citizens and to know their whereabouts and actions. The surveillance systems are extensive. Profiling based on embedded ARPANETs contained in commuters' transport cards, like Fast Track, which they have in San Francisco, and we have many others in many other cities, and other consumer goods and services, wiretapping of phones and internet, gate monitoring, surveillance and spy cams, all of which are part of the lives of many people in the extraterrestrial world. The DHS uses profiling to identify individuals as part of a group or category of persons, potential threats to homeland security, but the consequences that they lose autonomy and self-determination by being arrested, imprisoned and tortured. Marcus is taken into detention a second time and subjected to waterboarding, a simulated execution where the subject is strapped to an inclined bench and water is poured over his or her head, filling the nose and mouth and causing gagging. The DHS uses the media to spread disinformation about the XNet movement that Marcus forms after his release. Marcus mobilises young hackers called the Agitators as a force which manifests their otherness by resisting and transgressing the DHS surveillance and oppressive controls. They do this by beating them at their own game, using illegal covert communication technologies to circumvent the government systems. For example, Marcus uses the paranoid Xbox operating system that ensures that documents and communications remain secret within its complication detection proofing system. He also jams the tracking systems for commuters. And by demonstrating this capacity to act, Marcus and the ex-netters ensure that they are not passive subjects. Their subversive actions are also condoned in the text as necessary and justifiable in extreme circumstances. Marcus and his ex-netters not only challenge the hegemonic domination of the DHS, but also what they perceive as a domination by adult society. Their challenge through the web of trust and their T-shirt statement, "Don't trust anyone over 25, are attempts to make it possible for their otherness to reassert itself in a form of resistance and transgression. From a Foucauldian perspective, Marcus represents a non-normative idea of freedom, a freedom which he finds can only come with transgression. The message that Little Brother delivers is that technology is a tool which everyone should know how to use to ensure their privacy and freedom, and that when it is used by a central power such as the state for knowing about, for tracking and surveillance, then individuals will be vulnerable. Knowing how to use technology is a source of empowerment for Marcus. He says, "The best part of all this is how it made me feel in control. My technology was working for me, serving me, protecting me. It wasn't spying on me. This is why I loved technology. If you used it right, it could give you power and privacy." Furthermore, the closing comment in the afterword, written by Andrew Bunny Huang, Xbox hacker, exhorts readers to find their inner Maastricht and resist attempts of the state to take away their freedom. The full quote is, "Maastricht is in you and me. Little Brother is a reminder that no matter how unpredictable the future may be, we don't win freedom through security systems, cryptography, interrogations and spot searches. We win freedom by having the courage and the conviction to live every day freely and to act as a free society, no matter how great the threats are on the horizon. Be like Maastricht, step out the door and dare to be free." The final text, Article 5, takes its readers to a time in the future, a time when war has destroyed most of America. Technology has now come full circle, moving from the kind of ubiquitous computing and mass consumerism that typically are experienced by countries such as the USA and represented in Little Brother, to an almost pre-technological and war-ravaged state. Little Brother, Article 5, like Little Brother, Article 5 takes up the discourse of vulnerability that has slipped into American consciousness since the attacks of September 11, 2001, and resulted in increased security precautions and anxieties. Even the Hunger Games speaks of North America as having been reduced to ashes. While Little Brother illustrated how Marcus and his activist group successfully integrated mobile media to subvert the state's surveillance practices, the protagonists in Article 5 have to rely on their own resources as technology is no longer available to them. In the extended state of emergency that is enforced throughout the United States in Article 5, the American government has the power and authority to enforce mandatory compliance to its moral statutes. Extra-textually, Article 5 of the US Constitution describes the process whereby the Constitution can be altered, the fact that lends an air of assumed realism or mimetic possibility to the fictive world of the text. Disobedience results in fines, rehabilitation, torture or death. In this post-apocalyptic world, there is no space for dialogue or compromise, and transgression is dealt with severely. It is a world where war with an unnamed enemy has destroyed the way of life and infrastructure that American citizens once enjoyed. Homes are no longer filled with the spoils of consumer culture, television, computers, smart products and services, and new technologies are now old things of the past. The focalising character, Ember Miller, reflects on the difference that this change has made. While concerns and hopes in the extratextual world of today are often about the kind of world we are creating or wish to create with new technologies, The associated social practices they engender in Article 5 considers not the ubiquity of the world of information technology, but the diminished access by the populace, with almost total control in the hands of the state. Most citizens live in extreme poverty, with many sheltering in abandoned cars and foraging for food in the wastelands on the outskirts of what were once flourishing towns. In light of the previous discussion, Article 5 offers a scenario whereby the vision of an ambient environment has been destroyed, along with other basic human rights and necessities for living. President Scarborough rules this totalitarian state, and his branch of the military, known as the Federal Bureau of Reformation, euphemistically called the moral militia, have the responsibility to, and I quote from the text, enforce compliance with the moral statutes, to halt the chaos that has reigned during the 5 years that America has been mercilessly attacked. Walter Benjamin's aestheticisation of politics discussed in relation to the Hunger Games also emerges in this text, with the moral militia whose uniforms combine a tripartite symbolic representation of Nazi uniform aesthetic, American patriotism and religious icon. Accompanying the aesthetics of appearance is the domination of the rhetorical or figural over the literal and genuine modes of communication. Ember realises that there is something seriously wrong when she notices 2 cars parked outside her home, a blue van and an old police cruiser, each displaying the FBR, the Federal Bureau of Reformation emblem, sunrise logos, and the false rhetoric of unity, one whole country, one whole family. The moral militia soldiers take her mother away for violating Article 5, which in this text refers to children conceived out of wedlock. But Ember's struggles of resistance result in her being also removed from her home and taken to a girls' reformatory and rehabilitation centre in a remote location. The antagonistic world of the novel is characterised by a struggle for dominance and survival, with the allies and enemies, winners and losers, clearly delineated by the level of power they exert. The price of homogeneity in this text is the eradication of difference, especially ideological difference. In this context of extremism, the state operates through intimidation and force, seeking subordination and compliance. The totalising thought and action by the state disavows any dissidence. Ostensibly, this closed system of rule is intended to provide a sense of security and stability after the war. And by using the metaphor of wholeness and family, the state constructs an image of itself as a unified, not fragmented body politic that controls and regulates its citizens. However, despite its force and power, there are individuals and groups such as the resistance who are not passive, impotent and completely at the mercy of the FBR. And similarities can be drawn between the resistance in this text and Katniss's covert violation of the dictates of the Capitol in Hunger Games and Marcus's subversive internet actions against the DHS in Little Brother. Despite its limited technological environment, Article 5 nevertheless encapsulates the lateral surveillance that governments of many countries are encouraging. In 2010, the US Department of Homeland Security, which featured as an antagonist in Little Brother, unveiled a new anti-terrorism initiative called If You See Something, Say Something campaign. With this campaign and its legal amendments, the DHS encourages and facilitates a new vigilance and peer-to-peer monitoring, making it easy and natural for ordinary citizens to be the ears and eyes that watch and listen to neighbours, family members and fellow shoppers, travellers and sports fans. Since 9/11, governments and other organisations such as airport security have promoted a vigilant mindset amongst people. Lateral surveillance is not new. The East German security agency, known as the Stasi, spied on millions of people in the 40 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. In addition to its 100,000 full-time staff, the Stasi watched from cars and streets, opened letters, bugged apartments and wiretapped phones. It also induced family, couples and friends to spy on each other, resulting in millions of index cards and screeds of documents. What Article 5 demonstrates is how lateral surveillance intensifies in times of crisis, especially crisis of domestic and national institutions. Furthermore, it shows how the state, through its Stasi-like Federal Bureau of Reformation, drives lateral surveillance by soft persuasion or coercion of citizens to integrate surveillance and reporting into their daily lives. People that the young protagonists Chase and Ember encounter on their dangerous journey to reach a safe house respond differently to the oppressions and opportunities that characterise their worlds. For example, the Loftons, a friendly couple who appear to offer them refuge, actually plan to profit from their capture by the FBR. The profiteers, who sell them a car with petrol, the members of the underground resistance, friends and FBR soldiers, all have formed themselves and shaped themselves into certain kinds of subjects. In each situation, the practices of the self involve their own regulatory practices on their bodies, conduct and manner, so that they can survive. For some, such as Ember and Chase, the self-transformation means that they are able to resist and struggle against the FBR and those that are intent on harming them, but at the same time remain a moral subject. A similar outcome was achieved in the Hunger Games with Katniss and Peter's decision to not kill one another. Survival remains the common reason for how the various characters act. The different encounters with others in Article 5 illustrates Foucault's idea of capillary power. By not being purely located in the state, but extending itself beyond the centre, power invests in institutions such as the Reformatory Centre and relies on the cooperation of a whole network of individualised techniques. Apart from the FBR soldiers, individuals and couples participate in practices. Apart from the FBR soldiers, individuals and couples participate in practices and techniques that contribute to reproducing oppression and domination. By informing on unwanted people such as Ember and Chase, people like the Loftons remain subject to the oppressive regime of the state. The enforced learning of the statutes is another instance of capillary power, where power reaches into the very bodies of individuals, shaping their attitudes, actions and learning processes. Chase and Ember are not simply victims, subject to the power of others, as they are also their own agents and make the decisions to act as moral subjects. In reflecting on her decision to not shoot Tucker, an FBR soldier who was blocking their attempt to escape from a prison and who also killed her mother, Ember asks, "Should I have killed Tucker? Should Chase have? Tucker could hurt so many others now. There was no right answer." The choice resulted in an ambiguous outcome that highlights the point that even retrospectively, one cannot always be clear about the net result. The three novels deal with the idea of personal freedom and how that freedom is put at risk when governments are no longer working for the benefit of the people. Bowman's crisis of agency. The dystopian societies that they depict are the kind that David Lyon sees as, and I quote, directing our attention to the negative, constraining and unjust aspects of surveillance. However, this viewpoint does not take into account the productive cognitive estrangement that such dark representations might provoke. For some readers, these texts might spark a call to action, a goal that Cory Doctorow hopes to achieve, or engender a healthy scepticism about the arguments for the extension of surveillance in our lives, or instigate reflection and possibly ethical engagement, or, as Frederick Jameson suggests, provoke a fruitful bewilderment, jarring the mind into some heightened consciousness. For me, these texts draw attention to the exclusionary emphases of security surveillance initiatives and the discourse of suspicion that characterises our world. Along with the new vocabulary of surveillance, gadgets, devices and systems, other words are being singled out and as proscribed categories of people that warrant suspicion. The texts have their own categories of domination and exclusion. And while I'm aware of the dangers of collapsing the differences between textual worlds and everyday experiences, these young adult fictions have the capacity to foster awareness of ethical dilemmas, as well as the consequences of immoral or unjust human actions. In his book on privacy, Raymond Wax begins with a short fairy tale. Once upon a time, passengers boarded an aircraft without a search. Hacking described a cough, probably caused by a virus, and cookies were meant to be eaten rather than feared. Wax's humorous reminder of how words change their meaning also alerts us to the fact that technology will invariably continue to invent new words and new meanings. Orwell's coining of Big Brother provided a way of conceiving how individuals' privacy is threatened by almost constant surveillance and anticipates the possibility of new information technology for monitoring body and brain processes. The authors of the text that I have discussed have an advantage over Orwell and other writers of that time in that the advances in biotechnology, information technology, and the science of quantum theory have produced realities that are no longer science fiction. Writers will continue to imagine the future, draw on past literature for inspiration, provoke readers into thinking about surveillance, and ponder, as H.G. Wells memorably put it, the shape of things to come. Thank you.